Come on, Vladovic.
So, Dr. Vladovic, there was 1.24 seconds left on that one speaker. I believe they were trying to transfer time. If you'd like...
Like you care, Monica.
If you'd like, I'll make a motion to allow her to have the 1.24 minutes of time.
Wait a minute. I got hit at this board by Jefferson Crane, and you're giving her time.
Yeah, that's right. You broke every one of your rules.
I second the motion.
I'm sitting here
Okay.
and you all are making exceptions.
Would you please sit down? Go ahead, please.
You allowed a felony to go on here, Vladovic.
Sir, I'm going to make a statement to you and to everyone else, and I'm going to make it right now, and I'm going to read it very carefully. I suggest you listen. Ma'am, 1 second.
I suggest you follow your own rules of the law.
Each person who addresses the board shall not make personal, impertinent, slanderous, or profane
I have the law on that, Vladovic, and you have it, and it doesn't count.
Any person who makes such remarks or who utters a loud, threatening, personal, or abusive language or engages in any disorderly conduct which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of any board meeting shall at the discretion of the president or majority of the board be barred from further audience before the board during that meeting. So I'm just going to say we're going to be civil and be fair. Ma'am, you get a turn. You get 1 minute and welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Olga Perez, and I'm a parent from Boyle Heights, and I'm also a leader of LA Voice. I'm here representing 4,000 families and 30 congregations. My 2 girls went to Lincoln High School, and my grandson's 2 years old, and he'll be attending Murchison Elementary School. Last year, we dedicated our time and effort on passing Prop 30. We made a turnout of 3,700 voters. We did most of our schools. We did it for most of our schools, and for our children. We are invested in this. The only way that the promise of LCFF will be kept is if the parents are seen as a real partner in this decision making. At our schools, our voices of our parents is not the priority, and the decisions that are made without us. LA Voice has collected 886 petitions because we wanted you to know that this is important to us, and we want our voices to be heard. We know the needs of our schools and the others that others do not see. We are committed to making sure we are included in these decisions. We care about foster kids, English-speaking kids, and low-income kids. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes it. Okay, Mr. Chairman. We have a discussion now of any board members. This is the second interim. Be advised that the superintendent will issue his preliminary budget on April 4th. So this is to meet the criteria for the county right now for this year's budget, not next year's, this year for the rest of the year. So it's a legal thing because we submitted a budget a certain way. So that's just the way. Any discussion? Oh. No.
So sure. So I wanted to call the attention, well, I guess of the board members, to in the second interim, page 4 of 7 in the second interim financial report. And I was hoping that Megan could comment on that chart. So there's a chart there that says second interim out year estimates. And it says 2014-2015 balance in millions, 110 million. And then 2015-2016 in millions, 140.8 million.
Good morning, board members. Megan Riley, Chief Financial Officer. In the informative that we attached to the second interim, there is on page 4 of 7 on the informative, the beginning of a multi-year look at what the out years, that is 14-15 and 15-16 numbers for revenue and expenditures and the net result of that information, how it affects our multi-year forecast. As Dr. Vladovic mentioned, usually the interim is focused primarily on the 13-14, the current year's expenditures and revenues, but we submit to the County Office of Education updated multi-year forecasts. This information on page 4 of 7 now incorporates the latest information from the governor's January announcement, the January revision, where he announced that he was going to be putting about $4 billion plus into K-12 education under the Prop 98 formula and under the local control funding formula. Based on this additional information and updating revenues and expenditures, we are now projecting in 14-15 an unassigned balance of $110.5 million in 14-15 and $140.8 million in 15-16. This is before the State Board of Education's proportionality rules regarding local control funding formula have been applied. And that is the State Board of Education has, under the local control funding formula and the new local control accountability plan, designated a formula that deems how you calculate how much needs to be called into a proportionality formula and applied to the population of youth that is your English language learner, free and reduced lunch, and foster youth children. Proportionality is also designated on this sheet that our estimate at this point preliminarily is that 110 million of the 110.5 is designated as proportional.
So I guess one of the things that I want to be clear about then is when people are talking about Prop 30 and how hard they worked, and I know they worked extremely hard to get Prop 30 passed, when now we're talking about money and LCFF and all these other things that are coming along, how much money are we talking about for LCFF for the 2014-2015 year? Because my understanding in our discussions, and that's we can clarify now, was that we're looking at 110 million because due to our structural deficit or our investments that we've made previously as a board, that that some of the money that we would ideally be getting is going to that structural deficit or our previous investments. And so we have 110 million to work with in terms of LCFF in the 2014-2015 year. Is that accurate?
Based on the second interim information, the unassigned amount in 14-15 is the $110.5 million. And the majority of that is designated right now, it's designated as proportional. Correct.
Okay, so I think it's really important that the public understand that the amount of money that we're talking about for LCFF right now for 2014-2015 is, I know it seems like a big number in a way, but it's only 110 million. It's really not that much. My understanding is a 1% raise is 40 million, and like 11 teachers would be, I believe, 111 million, or I mean, we're not talking about a large amount of money, and it's really important that we get that message out there because otherwise people are going to be extremely disappointed. And then the other thing is, let's say we take that 100, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, we take that 110 million and we put it into something, we make an investment with that 110 million. Well then the following year, 2015-2016, we're looking at 140 million. If we've already invested 110 million in certain programs, then now we're only talking 30 million additional funds. So it's really important that as we're out there talking to people and as we're making decisions, we really think about the money because it's actually not that much. So, so correct me if anybody here can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to be corrected. I'm new here. So, and then I wanted to discuss with Megan page 5 of 7 as well.
Would you mind if we went to another question that came back?
Oh, absolutely.
That way we can
that's fine.
just move around. Monica Garcia was next, and we'll have her one. Then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll come back to you.
So I want to just thank the community organizations and parents and students and community leaders who joined us this morning. Superintendent, my question is to you. So certainly, I am grateful there are no pink slips in LA Unified and we are not talking to you about cuts. I'm glad about that. 2, I hope you have learned over the last 5 years, we make investments that are about the facilities we have and the people we hire that take up the bulk of our money. and that is just an ongoing reality. And so I am certainly comfortable and willing to stand up before you and say we have invested in adult ed, we've invested in early ed through SRLDP, and yes, in LA Unified we have classrooms of K-3 that are 24-to-1, and we have invested in that, and I think you asked us to do that. So, but Superintendent, my question to you is, will you in June bring this board, or in April, whenever you bring your budget, will you bring us an option around beginning to distinguish for this community? One, we want to have always more transparency, and I think over the years we have been moving towards that, but will you bring us a choice, an option that does support the principles of the promise of LCFF, as stated by the governor, that we can invest in communities where there are higher needs, and that is a different way than we have invested in the past?
So my budget presentation, initial proposal, will come inside of the first draft of the Local Control Accountability Plan, the LCAP. So this is the first year the two come together. And the budget will be entirely along the guidelines, as Ms. Ratliff and you both just said, the adopted state regulations of the investment of that amount. So when we talk about the proportionality, the entirety of the proportionality is to be targeted to support youth who live in circumstances of poverty, and youth who don't speak English yet at a proficient level, and youth who live in foster care. And it will be, for the first time, gratefully, a multi-year budget, so that there will be options. This board will adopt whatever budget it seems and deems appropriate at the end, and there are options about those investments in year 1, year 2, and year 3.
So I want to say out loud, I support those pieces that I heard at the microphone of investing in training for parents and teachers, of investing into the populations of highest need. But I also want to say to you, we have had employees who have taken cuts and furlough days, and we also have to be accountable to them and support them. So it is our job, the 6 of us with the superintendent, to put out a path that we acknowledge the contributions of the people who work so hard for us every day, and we put this organization on a road to leverage and keep the LCFF promise and become more transparent and get to more graduation and be clear and accountable for how we spend money. Gracias.
For a couple of points of clarification, Ms. Riley, we are today, when we adopt this second interim, this is very different what we're doing today than the superintendent's budget that he is going to release a draft of on April 4th. I just want to confirm that that is the case.
That is correct.
Okay, and I also want...
And just as a reminder, this happens every year. It's a county regulation, fundamentally to show that you will either be in the red or the black in the year you're in. We will be in the black.
So what the board is approving today is really a technical process in terms of our relationship with the County Board of Education.
You do it twice a year. You already did it once right after the holidays. You do it now. So you twice tell the county that you are solvent in the year you're in.
And this is so simply what we are doing today is our job to make sure we maintain fiscal stability and viability of this district. I just want to clarify that because we are talking about budget, but the budget that people have come to have their voices heard about today is really the budget that you will be releasing a draft of on April 4th.
That's the one that's in development. This is the one that's almost done.
And to clarify, although I know that you don't know, Superintendent, about all the meetings that different board members have had in their communities, can you give us an estimate of how many meetings that we have had to gather input and listen to community members in this process?
Yeah, we've had dozens and dozens, nearly 100 across the district. And those are ones that we've been invited to and ones we've hosted. Those are ones that we've asked to come and give comment to and one that board members have hosted. In many respects, I think LA has really been a model at the issue. And I also remind folks that this has been also the entire online version as well,
right,
which have been tens of thousands of pieces of input.
And you know, just to say out loud what I assume to be true, but I want to make sure that we make it part of public record. I'm assuming, Superintendent, that as you prepare this draft on April 4th, you will, as board members, will take into account all of the comments and the input that you've heard from the community in this process.
That is how it has been drafted to date, and then we want to remind folks that you, as part of the new state regulations, crafted the LCAP Oversight Committee, who you will go back and forth with. It's not just a budget this year. It is a budget inside of, people have used the term a public report card, that's what the LCAP is.
And so even though today we are actually doing something that's very perfunctory, the budgeting process from here on out, because of Prop 30 and because of the LCFF and the LCAP, will really be a different, much more participatory process. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. This budget was crafted into old regulations.
Right.
The one that we're
voting on today.
Right.
And so I just want to make one more point of clarification because I want to be really clear about our language. We have been using a term structural deficit, and I think of the structural deficit very, very differently. I think of structural deficit when I think about the unfunded federal mandates for IDEA and special education that create almost a $200 million hole in our budget. That to me is structural. What we are talking about in terms of continuing funding, my understanding, I want to make sure we clarify this today as we take this vote, is my understanding is that throughout the budget crisis, we chose to make investments for the survival of this district and the survival of public education in the best way we could provide it during the crisis. And we essentially put that on a credit card, assuming that Proposition 30 would pass, that we would get the LCFF. So when we talk about the 110 million additional that was referenced by Ms. Ratliff and Ms. Riley, that's in addition to the investments that we've already chosen to make to stabilize public education in Los Angeles. So I want to just clarify that.
That's on top of that. That is correct.
Okay.
And the base funding is ones where you continue to make investments, and you signal that by not letting anybody go in layoff.
Thank you. Monica?
Great. So, so yes, I wanted to call attention to page 5 of 7. And specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the pending changes. And so it says there are several pending issues not addressed in the second interim projections. The district is currently looking into the various solutions to the cafeteria fund cash flow needs that could potentially decrease cafeteria support by $10 million on a one-time basis. In addition, there are several special education program changes that could necessitate an increase in special education support in the amount of $40 million. Finally, state changes pertaining to non-mandatorily expelled students may result in a reduction of revenues. So I was just wondering, Megan, if you could comment briefly on those 3 items.
Certainly. We added this pending changes because there are certain programs that are still under review for potential adjustments. We thought they were of such magnitude that the board members should be aware of them ahead of time because they are not incorporated in either our expenditure or our revenue assumptions in second interim. The first is the fact that the cafeteria fund, we have been looking at their cash flow needs throughout the year, and it looks like they may have a cash requirement at the end of the year. So we are looking at alternatives for, rather than taking it from the general fund, which would affect our bottom line, if there are other alternatives that we could use that wouldn't affect our ending balances or impact the general fund. And that is a $10 million potential impact. If we find another alternative, it would be good news because we would then have the general fund preserved. The other issue that we mentioned is one that is an ongoing nature, special education support. And as you know, we are looking at kind of the requirements for special education and the expenditure needs therein. There is a special education support requirement that right now is about $40 million in an ongoing manner, that we're seeing if we can find the means within the program to support those requirements. And we're not yet incorporating that increased expenditure by increasing the general fund support to special education until we work with the program managers to diligently see if there are other alternatives as well. But if that comes about and we do not find other alternatives, there would be potentially a $40 million hit, and it is an ongoing, expected to be an ongoing reduction against our general fund. Finally, state changes pertaining to non-mandatorily expelled students may result in a reduction of revenues. That's pertaining to a program that has actually been being run under the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Under the LCFF formula, the funding flow for this program for many of the probationary students that are serviced by the County Office of Education that are expelled from our schools, they are now serviced by the County Office of Education's programs, used to go directly to LACO, the Los Angeles County Office of Education, now is expected to flow within the LCFF funding formula to the local educational agency, LAUSD, that is the geographic where these students live. That is a estimated 600 students. It could impact about $10 million. Our question becomes, because it should be a pass-through, is whether or not how the LCFF formula works, whether we will see an additional $10 million that we then flow to LACO, or whether it is something that because of the rules on declining enrollment, it comes out of Hyde. So it is one that we are researching and working with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Seems like it is also one that is going to be a temporary funding flow stream. But we wanted to make sure that the board members were aware that that was being under review and we're coordinating with LACO.
So potentially that amount in the pending changes section is about $40, $50, $60 million.
Correct. The special education is ongoing. The LACO is ongoing unless they change the rules. The one for the cafeteria is good news ongoing, one time. So it's a little bit kind of just, the $10 million for cafeteria would be good news, would add to your bottom line. The others would be bad news and would take away from the general fund.
The next section is the Ensure Financial Sustainability section, and it says the district now must shift focus from short-term stabilization to long-term financial sustainability. It's still on page 5 of 7. Even with additional funding from LCFF, the district continues to face declining enrollment and increasing fixed costs. In addition, increased employer pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities remain to be significant ongoing concerns. I was wondering if you could comment on that briefly.
Certainly. In the final section of the informative, we do highlight some long-term, since this is such a short-term look only at really primarily on 13-14, but we have to do a multi-year forecast to update revenues and expenditures. We wanted to highlight some long-term issues that are being discussed